after everything Jonathan had gone through in these 5 seasons, his takeaway is that corporations are bad. That doesn't make any sense
Mhm.
at all. If anything, Jonathan should have been the most radical libertarian possible
Mhm.
coming out of that.
Welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon, where the best ideas win. I'm your host, Josh Herring. This is a show all about ideas, about how we can rebuild a collapsing culture. My guests all have the credentials, the wisdom, the experience to say something meaningful, to contribute to the rebuilding of our moment. Today, my guest is Dr. Brad Birzer. Brad holds the Russell Amos Kirk Chair in American Studies, and he is a professor of history at Hillsdale College. He is a prolific writer. He has written biographies of Tolkien, Russell Kirk, and I believe possibly Batman. Ray Bradbury and Neil Peart are all in development. There is a long-term project about the Inklings coming out in 2026, Lord willing. He's also a co-founder and a senior contributor at the Imaginative Conservative. We're getting together today to discuss Stranger Things. Brad, welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon.
Hi, Josh. It's great to talk to you. I have always admired you, even when you were a student. I just thought you were a great, great guy, and I'm glad that we've maintained our relationship and our friendship. That means a lot to me.
Well, you were a seminal professor and very helpful to me. I'll just
Good.
mention since I mentioned TIC. I do want to. When I think back on, I took your Jacksonian American history class the junior
Yeah.
year at Hillsdale, and I distinctly remember you talking about using. I want to say it was a Dragon something voice writing
Oh,
software.
yeah. Yeah. Dragon
Um,
Dictate. Right. Yeah.
you were the first professor that I met who just was very excited and publicly excited about writing for a really wide audience and writing in such a way that normal people could understand great ideas. And so you've been
Thanks.
a great role model to me in that. And you also helped me place my very first internet essay. So
Oh,
that
that's
was very
great.
kind of you. Yeah.
Good. Good.
Uh,
And here you are. Your book's coming out. I mean, this is great.
It's
So
there's all kinds of stuff
fantastic.
going on. Well,
Yeah. Wonderful.
our audience is here not to hear us reminisce about old times. Unfortunately, we'll have to do that for another day. But we're here to talk about Stranger Things, and
Sure.
I know you've got an editorial out in today's Wall Street Journal about Stranger Things as the whole series. I wanted to start really with the significance of Stranger Things because I've watched all 5 seasons in part because I remember you writing something about season one way back when. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is clearly a show to follow. And it seems to me that this is one of those shows that captures the imagination and really has a wide ranging audience in terms of ages. This is not just a children's show. It's not just a senior citizen show. It's not just a college student show. There seems to be a lot of folks across generations that are interested in Stranger Things. So I'd love to hear you talk to us for a moment. Why does this show matter? Why is this significant? What about it captures the imagination?
Yeah, well, I think for one, I mean, there are a lot of things we could talk about, Josh, a lot on this. I think one of the most important things that Stranger Things did is it proved that this new medium of streaming TV actually works, and it's something different than episodic TV, and it's something different than a movie. And so I think that when we first saw things like Netflix and the streaming, I'm not sure people quite knew what to do with it. There had been a show, and I don't want to sound like I'm an expert on TV. I'm actually very particular about what I like. Generally, when I like something, I throw myself into it completely. But I'm not a guy who watches TV every day or anything, so I don't want to give a wrong impression. But an earlier show that I think really influenced Stranger Things was a show by J. Michael Straczynski called Babylon 5.
Mm.
And that was really the first show that played around with Twin Peaks had done it slightly, but Babylon 5 was really the first show that tried to tell a story over several years. So it did have episodes, but those episodes were always tied to something larger. And, in a lot of ways, this is exactly what soap operas were doing throughout the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, into the 80s, but nobody had applied them to serious TV. And so when the Duffer Brothers come along 9 years ago and they say, look, we've got this whole new way of doing this, we can tell this story, but we're going to tell the story over 9 hours rather than 1 hour or 2 hours for a movie. And that could have failed. Really easily could have failed.
Hmm.
But the Duffer Brothers were amazing about this. They got great actors. They have a great story. They've got great creepiness. Anything that you can possibly imagine, they were able to tie together. And Stranger Things is kind of a greatest hits series in that it's taking from Stephen King, it's taking from Babylon 5, it's taking from A Tale of Two Cities. I mean, it's taking from all kinds of things, but in its own manifestation, it's original, even though it borrows for so much. And so I think there are a lot of things to that. But again, Josh, I'll just give you a personal note on this, and it's very hard for me to distance myself from it. I was in seventh grade when the 1980s started. And I was a senior in college when the Berlin Wall came down in November of 1989. So I am totally an 80s guy. In every way, the 80s shaped me: movies, music, politics, everything. I'm totally an 80s guy. And so when I'll never forget, in 2016, watching the first episode of Stranger Things where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was, oh my gosh, I was immediately transported back to my childhood. And I'm exactly the same age that Nancy Wheeler is supposed to be in the story. So, everything she's going through, I love it. It's just for me, it's autobiographical. And I grew up in a town very similar to
Hmm.
Hawkins. Same kind of demographic, mostly white, but definitely black families, Hispanic families. So you had a mix of peoples, and it was about the same size, and it had its own mythology and its own lore and its own haunted houses and those kinds of things. So it just everything really resonated with me, Josh. And it's even to this day, thinking about watching this first few episodes, I still get kind of emotional thinking about how great it was.
Well, I think that's a really interesting place to start our conversation then, because there's a part of Stranger Things that is definitely nostalgic. And it's definitely intentionally, I think, evoking that previous era. Because I look at Stranger Things, I think there's a generational element to this as well. Because I think I'm an older millennial for folks who like count everything by way of generations. I'm 37. I was born in 1988. I look at the world depicted
Yeah,
in Hawkins, Indiana, as a world I never really experienced. Um, by
of
the
course.
time by the time I was 12, we had moved from Clarksville, Tennessee to Chesapeake, Virginia. And Clarksville, even then, was not really a small town. Today, it's basically a suburb of Nashville in northern Middle Tennessee. But Chesapeake, Virginia, is a city. And I remember distinctly my parents kind of freaking out about the fact that I could not ride my bike just anywhere once we lived in the
Mm,
big city. They were, and so the picture, I think folks who are kind of my age and under, I think we tend to look at Stranger Things, and the first thing that leaps out is like, these kids are just running all over the place,
yeah.
and there don't seem to be like after school clubs or massive sports team commitments. I mean, there's a little bit. Maybe there's like one afternoon a week they play baseball or whatever. But there's just this. It's just this different world of kids roaming the streets and the fields and kind of doing whatever they want from say roughly 4 to midnight, based on on Stranger
Yeah.
Things.
I'll tell you, Josh, that's not unusual for my generation. So I'm 58. I'm Gen X. I'm 58. I'm again same age as the guys in the Breakfast Club. All of that. That's my generation. And I have a great mom. I had a terrible, absolutely terrible stepdad who was in prison and
Mhm.
terrible guy. But my mom's fantastic. Still, she's 89. She's a wonderful, wonderful person and a good mom. But on Saturdays, I would wake up, Josh, and I'd get up around 6:30, and I'd have breakfast, and then I would get on my bike and I would meet my friends. And as long as I was home by dinner, that's all that mattered. So from roughly 7 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, I was totally 100% on my own with my friends. And our parents never interfered, nothing. And that's so, and I have 7 kids. I have not raised my kids like that at all, even though we're in Hillsdale. I haven't done that. But I mean, I knew every single spot of my hometown
Mm.
because I had biked everywhere throughout that hometown. And we knew all the ditches, we knew the culverts, we knew the drainage areas, everything. And we just explored like mad. So, and frankly, after dinner on a Saturday, I could go out again as long as I was home by bedtime.
Mm.
So it's a little exaggerated in Stranger Things, but not outrageously so.
Yeah, I think there's just so it's so interesting to see an artistic depiction of in that sense, that's a real world element that's changed, that
Yeah.
Stranger Things I think captures. Another piece I wanted to ask you about, just because I remember some of our political discussions years ago. If I remember this correctly, you have a libertarian streak
Oh,
in
yeah.
you somewhere, and Stranger Things definitely seems to have an anti-government, skeptical about the army kind of bent to it that becomes more prevalent the deeper into the show that you get. And of course, by season 5, which if anybody listening has not yet watched season 5, this is your spoiler warning. We're just going to talk about it from here on out. But because if you're tuning into the live stream, I assume that you've actually watched this already. But there's the military is the villain. I mean, they are the ones who
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of cooked us up. The whole wormhole structure is a result of a mad science experiment funded by government dollars. So, talk a little bit about some of the libertarian elements that show up in Stranger Things.
Yeah, and you're right, Josh. I call myself a conservative, but I'm definitely extremely libertarian, and very, very skeptical of government. Though, again, being an '80s guy, I love Reagan. Reagan was my president, and he will always be the model president for me as a gentleman, as a thinker, everything, bringing down the wall. Incredible. So, I mean, yes, I'm anti-government, but not so radically that I'm an anarchist, right? I'm not that
Sure.
at that level. But okay, I know you and I mean, so far I've said nothing but positive things about Stranger Things. Let me mix that up a little bit. Um, I think one of the greatest successes of Stranger Things was that it was not political in a
Mm.
partisan way, but it was deeply, deeply skeptical of the government. And so there's a politics to it, but it's not in your face. You should vote for this party or that party or that party. And here's where I really, in season 5, I was upset. At the end of season 5, if you remember, we have the guys sitting around
Mhm.
up on the roof of the radio station. They're the four older
Mhm.
guys, right? So you've got Steve, Robin, uh, Nancy, and Jonathan, and they're talking about what they're doing. And Jonathan is making anti-capitalist films. I was really upset by that.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I know you were upset by the coming out scene, and we can talk about that.
We'll get there, but yeah.
I was upset by the politics scene. I thought, first of all, why did they have to insert something like
Mhm.
that into this show? It was totally out of place. Second of all, after everything Jonathan had gone through in these 5 seasons, his takeaway is that corporations are bad. That doesn't make any sense
Mhm.
at all. If anything, Jonathan should have been the most radical libertarian possible
Mhm.
coming out of that. And so I really thought the Duffer Brothers blew it on that. And it doesn't taint the show for me, But I thought, oh man, what was even the point of that? And here you've got a thing like Stranger Things, which is clearly a capitalist enterprise. They're making money. I mean, the way they place Coke products on the show, they're clearly doing placement advertising. So don't be hypocrites now and start arguing against capitalism in the middle of
Mm.
this story. So yeah, I mean, as you can tell, Josh, I got
Yeah.
worked up about this, but it didn't make sense at all. And again, because I think the whole ethos of the show is so much, it's about individualism, it's
Mhm.
about community, it's about friendship, but all through freedom. It's about a free society going against a collectivist society.
Mhm.
And so I just didn't. I love the meta politics, but when they actually
Mhm.
did politics there at the end, I hated it.
Well, I think that's. I mean, you said that. I'm reminded of. I think it's season 3 or some, maybe a little bit into 4. But you have Hopper going to Russia, and you get some very clear Cold
Yeah,
War espionage type things happening. That level of political comparison, I think, works really well in a show that is so
absolutely.
iconically 1980s in the Cold War era. But I too thought that scene just did not resonate. And I'll admit I didn't pick up on the political ramifications of his of Jonathan's filmmaking as much as I was just thinking. It rang so false to me that these four who have been pretty close throughout the last 5 seasons and all these experiences have brought them together in the town of Hawkins, to then presume that they can all go totally different ways. They can kind of make fun of this town that they've loved in the
Yeah,
previous seasons. And they can just say, oh, we're going to get together in this other town in one of, I forget whose basement, but somebody had
right.
a relative with a basement. And I sat there thinking, these folks are never going to see each other again. And
Yeah,
they don't realize that this is the breaking of their fellowship, if I can bring Tolkien in for just a
yeah,
moment. And I think Tolkien maybe gives us a lens I want to introduce to our conversation. But I was thinking of
yes.
because I was trying to think of like, how do we discuss this without this being like I don't want to pretend that in 2025 we can really expect there to be a mainstream TV show made that doesn't have a gay character. That part
Mm,
doesn't necessarily just offend me, but I do think Tolkien's sense of in the On Fairy Stories essay about the inner consistency of reality as a way that we measure the success or failure of a story. So I think in that sense, that's a scene that had 2 notes of failure. You mentioned the just the political nature of Jonathan's filmmaking when that's not been his character. He's been the pothead throughout this whole
yeah,
show. And
right.
that's a big deal. Like he and Nancy have in part of their unproposal fight. He
Yeah,
doesn't like when she's drunk. She doesn't like when he's high. And suddenly he's focusing on being opposed to the system that enables the sale of marijuana that feeds his interest. That doesn't fit. And then these folks just not realizing that they're going in 4 totally separate directions. I think that also struck me as a failure of the story because their friendship should be a little bit more tightly knit than that at that point.
I agree, Josh. I would push back only on this. I've had conversations like that with old friends before.
Mhm.
And so when they had that conversation, I thought, oh man, I thought the Duffer Brothers were trying to make us think these guys don't realize that they're not going to meet
Oh,
again. So, I mean, exactly what you're saying, Josh, that
maybe.
they're not going to meet again. I thought that was part of the intention of the story, that we're supposed to feel bittersweet about that. But I do agree in their characters. They have given so much to Hawkins
Yes.
now that they're all leaving and going elsewhere. Didn't feel quite right. It
No.
seems like if they're truly protectors of Hawkins, they would come back and see it in its success as well as in its failure. But
Mhm.
I would also, I think there, and you and I haven't gotten into this yet. I do think there's a fairy tale element to Stranger Things. And I do think that there's an element that once you've gone into the other world and come back, things can never be the same. And it's like Moses not being able to go to the promised land, right? I mean, it's just, and I think there's something to that that the Duffer Brothers were trying to bring out in that
Mm.
conversation. I don't think they succeeded. I think that maybe it was a noble effort on their part.
Well, I think that's a great. Let's take that as a good transition moment to think specifically about the finale. I want to see if I can merge a couple things in this question. I mean, the way that that Netflix rolled this season out, I thought was quite interesting. I mean, it built suspense quite a lot, and it built expectation. I think across a fan base for what needed to happen in episode 8 of season 5, with releasing the first 4 episodes and then doing episodes 5 through 7 on Christmas Day. And then I had missed the memo. I thought everything came out Christmas Day. And I was telling my wife, they're like, oh, yeah, it's going to be over after this one episode. This is the last time
Mhm.
you have to suffer through me watching Stranger Things. And then she got pulled in, and we're like, that there's no way they're going to wrap this up in these 7 minutes left in this episode. And of course they didn't. But then by the time we get to New Year's Eve, we get episode 8. So I want to ask this with if Stranger Things is a fairy tale, if you're right about that, what did the Duffer Brothers need to accomplish in the finale?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's be cynical for a moment, Josh. I think the reason that Stranger Things did that was probably from Netflix's direction, right? If you have a November and then a December and then a January release, that's 3 months subscription. And so I think, again, there's the capitalism at work, right? And so I think that was part of it. But I also, okay, so if it's a fairy story, what do I mean by that? And I'm taking that directly from Tolkien, from On Fairy Stories. Right. So what do we have? We have in season one, a boy enters the woods. So it's like Dante. It's like something out of Smith of Wootton Major by Tolkien, and he experiences perilous realms by being in that other realm, by being in the upside down. And yet then he pulls his whole community in because they're all willing to sacrifice themselves for this boy, for Will. And so the whole community becomes a part of that. And I think that was one of the greatest strengths of the 5 seasons of Stranger Things is the party kept getting bigger and bigger and
Mhm.
bigger because of course, and it makes perfect sense that Mr. Clark would be a part of the party by the end. It's actually kind of shocking that he wasn't earlier a part of the party. I mean, here's the guy who's explaining everything and knows what's going on, but doesn't have a clue what's really going on. And so I think that was one of the great successes. But then when you end a fairy story, as Tolkien tells us, it has to end with a eucatastrophe,
Mhm.
right? For it to be a proper story, it has to end with the unexpected happy ending. And the fact that and again, spoilers here, right? But the fact that every one of the main parties survives, I actually took, and I know there's a lot of criticism of that because people are expecting Game of Thrones, but I thought it was brilliant. I
Mhm.
mean, I thought, okay, the Duffer Brothers are really living up to what they're doing here. They've given us success. And so again, I've seen all kinds of criticisms. Well, what that means is all these guys were just going through the heroic motions and so forth. But I don't think that's true at all. I think it's really necessary that at the end of The Lord of the Rings, the 4 hobbits make it back. It's not the same Shire that they left, and they still have to reclaim it, but they've made it. And that's exactly what happens at the end of Stranger Things. All of these great characters have made it. And and I think that's where, at least Josh, you're in my disappointment with that rooftop conversation. It's like, no, you guys can't make it and then split up. That's and yet remember, Frodo and Bilbo take off, right? They
Mhm.
have to go to the Blessed Realm, and Sam is left behind, just like Steve is left behind. And
Mhm.
so, and Steve, I mean, think about, okay, I know we're going to talk about the homosexuality here in a bit, but you think about Steve. Steve is the only one who has a healthy vision of what the
Mhm.
future is, and he gets it. He understands it. And he knows that life is about having kids, it's about being married, it's about having a family, it's about having friends, it's about teaching little league
Mhm.
baseball. That's life, right? And he gets that. And I think that's so important to the story. And I think Steve is Sam.
Hmm.
In every way, he's Sam. Oh, here he's the goofball. We when we meet him, he's crass. He's kind of a bully, and yet he reforms and he becomes the babysitter. He's the
Mhm.
loyal guy. And for me, Steve is the real hero. He and Mike are the real heroes of the
Mhm.
story. I just and Elle, of course, 11, but but she's supernatural. So yeah, I just think it's great.
Well, I think the eucatastrophe idea is, I think, essential to it being a fairy tale. The other thing I was thinking of when you were talking about a fairy tale is the emphasis that Tolkien places in that essay on atmosphere, and that fairy
Oh
is
yeah,
not just a it's not just a specific path and a specific place and a specific monster. It's a place where danger is real and magic can really happen. And I think that in that
yeah,
sense, you definitely get that. I think you definitely get that with the Upside Down. And the Upside Down
oh
is
yeah,
a portrayal of fairy, and you get the movement back and forth from and part of the if there's a horror, and I'm still not sure if Stranger Things really crosses into horror. But if there is horror, it's the breaking in of the monstrous side of fairy into the normal. And it's when I think it's Mrs. Byer gets the Demogorgon like claws her and everything. It's that kind of moment where you just see the greatest human strength can't really stand up against
yeah,
that, and she has immense courage and greatness for fighting for her family, even though she's at least half drunk on wine.
yeah.
She doesn't look great in some ways there, but she does at the same time. She's very sacrificial. So I think the fairy atmosphere there is also significant.
Yeah, I loved that scene because I think, again, and this is where the Duffer Brothers are not political, they're apolitical. But think about how important family is in that whole show.
Mhm.
I mean, because it's not just Mike, it's Mike and Nancy, but
Yep.
it's not just Mike and Nancy, it's Mike, Nancy, and Holly. And it's not just Mike, Nancy, and Holly, it's also Mr. and Mrs. Byer. I'm sorry, Wheeler, right?
Mhm.
So, in there for Mrs. Wheeler, especially, when we see her in season one, she's a great mom. Then, when we see her in season three, she's about to have an affair, and she's not
Mhm.
a great mom at all. In fact, she's terrible. She's, kind of a Mary Magdalene figure at that point. But then we see her in season five, and even though she's half drunk, and we can assume she's an alcoholic, and I think Nancy
Mhm.
probably is as well, it's running in the family. But what does she do? Her courage, coming out of that bathtub and think about even the wine bottle becomes the
Mhm.
weapon. And I thought that was amazing. And then, of course, when she blows up the laundry room,
So
that's
great.
great. It's so great. If anything, I was hoping that she would have a bigger role in the final episode.
Mm.
And think about Joyce.
Wow.
Joyce is the dedicated mom from the first moment, and to the point where she's suffocating, but she's still a great mom, a really great mom. And Hopper wants in the worst way to be a great dad.
Wow.
Yeah, and even Mr. Wheeler, I mean, he's goofy, but he's not a bad dad. He provides for his family, and yeah, he sleeps a lot, but he's the he's a good dad. Uh, Not perfect, but a
Yeah.
good dad. And so, how many Hollywood shows
Mm.
give us good moms and good dads? It's very rare in Hollywood. So kudos to the Duffer Brothers for doing that.
Now I
Oh,
do want
and
to.
Lucas's mom and dad, right? We only see them
I,
in that one scene in in the earlier seasons where Lucas is asking, "How do you impress a girl?" Right? But his parents, and clear, they're black, but they're middle class. So it's not like it's a ghetto scene.
Yep.
And so they normalize it. And again, there's that kind of beautiful look
Mhm.
at a middle class family. And I think that's so important in Hollywood.
Now, you made two statements about L a moment ago. I want to follow up on. One, you said
Sure.
L was a supernatural element. The other thing you said, all the major parties of the party survive. All the major members of the party survive. So, do you think that do you take the supposal to use a C.S. Lewis term, the supposal that L has survived and her death is sort of a mirage cast by Kali?
Yeah.
Is that do you take that as legit? I mean, that's a major contention bone with the final episode about whether or not Elle does in fact survive.
Yeah, it is ambiguous. No question about that. And it's very much, and Josh, I don't know where you come down on this, but it is very much like the end of Dark Knight Rises.
Mm,
I am thoroughly convinced that Batman is dead at the end of Dark Knight Rises. But most people say, oh, no, no, because Alfred sees him and but I think that's just Alfred wishful thinking.
mm,
I think it's just critical to the whole story that Batman's dead. He sacrifices himself. For this story, though, I think it's really important that Elle survives and is able to lead that life that
mm,
Hopper tells her she needs to lead. Because I think that's one of the most important conversations in all 5 years when, Hopper and Callie and Eleven are talking about the future in the
mhm,
lab and Collie's got the gun on Hopper, and Hopper just turns to Elle, and he's a great dad. He
mhm,
says, "Look, hon, you need to go experience life." And I think for anyone who has been abused, and if there's an abuse victim in the story, it is absolutely Eleven. She's been psychologically abused from the moment she came out of the womb, and she's been a product, and people have used her. I mean, for her to find completion, it's not about sacrificing her life. It's about sacrificing her friendship so
mm.
that she can go forward and find herself and then come back at the end of that. So I don't know the answer, Josh. I don't know what the Duffer brothers were thinking, but it strikes me that whereas Batman needs to die,
Mm.
Eleven needs to live, and she deserves to because of everything she's gone through.
I love that conversation that Hopper has with Elle, and in part because I don't know if you've seen. Hopefully, you haven't seen too much of this at Hillsdale, but in the I don't know the last 5 years or so, I've run into a large number of students, mostly high school, who are they are just they're open to nihilism and they're open to death in a way that seems really bizarre to me. That
Mm,
we almost now need to go back to establish a presupposition that life is good and it is better that people live. And we
yeah.
I don't think we shouldn't
Mm,
need to assert that. But I that's what I saw happening in that moment where Elle has really she's embraced a need for her to die and she's going to commit suicide under this kind of veneer of sacrificial love. And she is going to suicide because she loves her family and her friends. And Hopper is just completely unwilling to accept that as a tenable answer. And I
yeah.
think culturally, I think there's a huge need to get back to a culture that says, no, death is not an option. Like I'm thinking of that in light of both first Canada and now New York passing a medical assistance in death law,
Sure.
and like the government, the state being in the business of killing people who say they want to be killed, and presumably would kill lots of others who have no interest in dying. But I think that's what I saw happening there in that moment, and I think that was I thought one of Hopper's greatest moments as a character.
I agree. And think about this too. Hopper has been through hell. Absolutely. I mean, this is a guy who survived a gulag. And of course, when we first meet him in season one, he's addicted to those pills. We don't know what those pills were, but he's addicted to them. He's drinking beer when he wakes up in the morning. Clearly, this is a guy, and of course, his wife has left him,
Mhm.
and is remarried. He's lost his daughter and he's still living with the trauma of Vietnam. And this is a guy who wants to die. And yet, what do we see him in his final act? He proposes marriage to Joyce at that restaurant. And it's a beautiful, beautiful moment because for the first time in the entire series, we see Hopper deserves to be happy. And
Hmm.
it's he has earned it. He's totally earned it. And that's why I think his speech to 11 is so important because he's gone through all that. And remember, just a few episodes before, he was going to commit suicide to kill Vecna, right? He had
Hmm.
that
Right.
suicide vest on. And yet there's a noble I don't think that was him seeking death. I think that was truly noble. I think he was trying to save everybody and he was willing to give himself
Mhm.
and to do that. Whereas I agree with you totally, Josh, that when 11 is seeking it, it feels suicidal, not
Mhm.
sacrificial. And that's where, and I don't want the story to have ended on a suicidal note.
Mhm.
And I can't believe that's what the Duffer brothers were going for. That's why I think she has to be alive.
Well, since you mentioned Hopper and Joyce, let's stay with them for a moment. I'd love to get your thoughts on this comparison. I've thought that Jonathan and Nancy were headed towards marriage from season one. That seemed pretty evident to me that they were the two that were clearly attracted to each other, but had to break up and like mess with other people, and then they were going to get back together. And of course, the Duffer brothers did not do that with them. They have this instead. Jonathan and Nancy are in the upside down. Jonathan has been carrying around an engagement ring, and it's when they're literally in this like room with plastic rising that he unproposes to Nancy, and in so and I thought that was really interesting that instead kind of the culmination of their relationship is breaking up, and in contrast, you have Hopper and Joyce, who then he has this lovely proposal scene, and she accepts. And what struck me as really interesting there is that it's the young couple at the beginning. We see them end the show both heading into their careers. Nancy's going to be a journalist, and Jonathan is going to make movies. And they're set up as like, okay, your beginning of your life is careerism in a way, versus you've got the two that do get married happily are this kind of older couple at the tail end of their adult life before they are kind of in older years. um so I saw it struck me as the image of marriage that a comedy ought to end with here is placed oddly. It's placed with the older couple rather than with the younger couple, as if the implication is marriage is a thing that you get to when you figured out everything else, you've made all your mistakes, and then you
Mm.
get married, rather than you get married young and you make your mistakes together and you build your life together. What are your thoughts on the comparison between those two relationships?
Oh, that's great, Josh. I hadn't quite put it, I wouldn't have put it quite that way, but now that you say it, it makes perfect sense that's going on. Again, I would say this: Steve is the one with the proper vision, right? He hasn't fulfilled it, but he's got the proper vision. He wants a wife and he wants 6 kids, and he wants to be in Hawkins. And
Mhm.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful statement. And Steve, I mean, I say this as a straight guy. Steve's a really good looking guy.
The
He's
hair.
gonna, yeah. I mean, he's a catch, and obviously he's willing to sacrifice himself for anybody. Okay, again, I love the series overall. I thought the breakup scene was one of the weakest scenes
Mhm.
of the whole series. I was sitting there scratching my head. That plastic is melting. They're on the table, and they have been through so much together that even if they thought they were dying at that moment, which I think they did think they were dying, I think that that's the kind of thing that would have brought them much closer together than force them apart. And I realize that maybe in your last few breaths, you're deeply honest, but it strikes me that the honesty would be coming together rather
Mhm.
than separating at that moment. And so I didn't buy it. I will say this though, having said that, I was madly in love with a young woman in high school. And, we dated through college too. And I didn't end up marrying her. I married a completely different person. But partly is because, when I was 17 and 18, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I didn't get married till I was 30 when I did know what I was doing.
Mm.
And so I think one of the things we see, I mean, we're looking at these actors, Josh, who, I mean, Nancy's probably what in real life? She's probably
Oh.
30, right? I know she's supposed to be 18, but she's probably 30. And so I think when we see Jonathan and Nancy and the actors portraying them, we're not really seeing them as 18-year-olds. We're
Mhm.
seeing them as young adults. And so, but if they really are supposed to be 18, well, then we don't know what we're doing. And it does kind of make sense that they would break
Yeah.
up. So that's where I think maybe just because of the time lag in making the series, it's harder to judge those things. But I don't disagree with you, Josh. And I think that's a fantastic analysis of what they're looking at. And when we have seen, again, Lucas's parents are happily married. Mrs. Wheeler and Mr. Wheeler are not happy, but they have good kids,
Mhm.
right? So, and they're dealing, I mean, again, Mrs. Wheeler's an alcoholic. So you're dealing with serious problems there. But it's not an anti-marriage statement.
Yeah.
I still think the show is more pro-family than not.
No, I think that makes sense. I think and if anything, if I were trying to like draw a conclusion, which I'm not sure is really warranted or necessary, but it may just be that this show is ending with a variety of options. It's not ending as
Mm,
a like everyone must get married off, everyone must be paired off, but
right.
instead they're kind of showing these different things, and it's probably pushing it to ask Stranger Things to be providing a specific commentary on the state of marriage in the year of our
Mm.
Lord 2025. Um,
That may
I,
be, yeah.
I do want to pick up on something you mentioned though. I got this first from Kat Rosenfeld. I've been reading a lot of her articles in the Free Press this year, but she did a whole editorial that was spoiler free, all on just the cognitive dissonance of how much these actors have aged across the last 10 years, and how we're supposed to still see their like kind of the descendants of their cute first season selves in these actors and actresses who have definitely they've aged 10 years, and a 17-year-old actor playing a 14-year-old boy is now a 27-year-old actor playing an 18-year-old. And the I with the breaks in, I don't know if this would have happened if I'd been watching it straight through, but the having to kind of pause between episodes 4 and 5 and episodes 7 and 8 for a couple days, I found myself having to overcome this cognitive dissonance about how old the actors and actresses were
Yeah.
playing these high schoolers.
Yeah, I'm actually going to see Kat next week on
Oh,
Thursday. Yeah, she's a fantastic person, hilarious, spunky like you would imagine, mischievous, but really great person. But I hadn't seen that article by her. I'd like to see that. Yeah, I think it is a disconnect, and again, for me, I've liked all of Stranger Things, but I definitely like season one the best.
mm,
And I like season two almost as much as I like season one. And I think part of that is because the age does fit more with the actors at that point. Uh, and I also, I enjoy exploring the whole mythology of the Upside Down, but I also liked it when it was just mysterious and we didn't know what it was either. So yeah, I could probably go back and watch season one over and over again and never get tired of it. But I couldn't say that with, say, season three.
no.
Uh, yeah, I think once they start getting too old for what they're doing, it doesn't quite work as well. Still a great story. Yeah, and
I
if those come out on Blu-ray, I will absolutely buy all five seasons, and I'm sure my family and I will keep watching it. But yeah, it's definitely one and two that I love the most.
Well, let me ask you about the piece we've been headed towards, because I'm hoping you can give me a good sense of like why this was not as rough as it seemed to me. But I want to like so the uh, Will Byers having his coming out scene in
Right.
episode 7. That was one like I mean, and in all fairness to the Duffer Brothers, I had heard that that scene was coming well before I actually watched it.
Mm.
My X feed started showing up with people talking about it. Um, I didn't watch. I think I watched those a couple days after Christmas, so I already knew that was happening by the time I saw it. And since then, I keep seeing comparisons in time where I think that scene took something like 6 minutes and 51
Yeah,
seconds. And at least the most recent of those, apparently, Delta Force managed to capture Maduro
yeah,
in
yeah.
something
I
like
saw
six
your
minutes and
post on that. That was
34 seconds.
hilarious. Yeah,
I was like,
right,
and so
right.
the post, of
That was
course, is
hilarious. Yeah,
Will's coming out scene takes longer than it does for the
yeah.
United States to capture Maduro. Um, so, in light of everything we said earlier about the eucatastrophe and the fairy tale shape of Stranger Things, how does Will being gay affect this? Does it matter? Do you see that as being relevant? Is it a strength? Is it a weakness? How does that play into the story? What are your thoughts?
Well, and of course we've got two gay characters because we have Robin, and then we have Will, and I, I it didn't for example, I was more worked up about Jonathan making the anti-capitalist stuff than I was about the coming out. Um, I'll put it this way, Josh. When I was in junior high, so 1981, 82, what people call middle school now, right? We called it junior high then.
Mhm.
Um, but when I was in junior high, you absolutely the worst insult ever that you could get in the hallway or in the locker room was to be called a fag, right? That I mean, there was just no greater insult than that. By the time I got to high school, so that would, high school, I'm there 83 through 86. By the time I got to high school, the culture had changed pretty dramatically so that being gay was still odd, but it wasn't forbidden in the way that it had been earlier in the 80s. There's definitely a cultural shift. And so when I got to Notre Dame, there were lots of people who were openly coming out of the closet. One of my friends, and I was pretty shocked by it, one of my friends took out a full page ad in the Notre Dame newspaper claiming that he was now out of the closet. That's how he came
Oh.
out. And I was just kind of blown away by that. So there was kind of a moment in the mid to late 80s where it became kind of cool and countercultural to do that. And so that's how I was reading
Mm.
part of what Will was doing in the story. That there was this kind of dramatic moment where he's coming out and making this statement. And earlier figures in the 70s, like David Bowie, had
Mhm.
made, and Queen, the band, Freddie Mercury, they had made being gay kind of cool. And then, of course, in 1984, you get Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which they had their gay anthem song called "Relax" was number one, for most of the 1984. So there's definitely a change in culture about that. So if the Duffer Brothers are trying to be realistic to the 80s, it's not. They were still pretty faithful to it. Having said that, I did not like the coming out scene. I thought it was poorly done. One of the reasons, and you may disagree with me on this, Josh. I of the four boys, the guy who plays Will is the weakest actor. He's
Oh.
just he's not as good and as Mike and Lucas and Dustin. And so I don't think he carried it off very well. It came across, I know he was trying to project strength, but it came across as just being whiny.
Hmm.
And and so I'm not making a statement about him being gay or not. That
No.
I'm not gay. I don't quite understand it, but I have several gay friends and they're truly good friends. So I thought I didn't get the way the Duffers were trying to make it happen. I understood that for the story, it's absolutely true that every one of these characters, in order to defeat Vecna, has to become their best self. That I get. And if Will's best self is being gay, okay, that's true to the plot. But that would, it doesn't quite mesh with the other
Yeah.
superpowers that are going on. But I thought when Robin came out to Steve in season 3, I thought it was terribly awkward. I was just like, oh, this is so weird. Why are they doing this? I just didn't get it, why it mattered for the story. So again, whether they're gay or not, I guess it doesn't bother me that much. It was more the way they did it. But I will say this, Josh, in the next episode where Will is talking to Mike, and Mike says, "You're not my friend, you're my best friend."
Yeah.
I thought, okay, that just redeemed everything that happened in the previous episode.
Mm.
Because yeah, if Mike was truly Will's best friend, then he would still love Mike even if Mike is gay. Right? That's not going to change at all. They're still best friends. And I thought, okay, that's great. That so it made that whole totally awkward, cringy 6-minute scene, it made it worth it for those
Mm.
few seconds there. Am I making sense, Josh?
No, I think you are, and that's honestly, it's really helpful to know that that is not completely out of touch with the '80s. Again, I'm a little bit younger. I didn't live through that era. I've always heard the phrase "the gay '90s," and I know there was the long march through the institution. So like homosexuality is an open thing by the time you get to the '90s. So it does make sense that that would have there would have been some pieces of that beginning in the '80s and in the '70s, and there what you were saying about David Bowie fits with some of the music choices. I mean, there was a David Bowie anthem. I think it might have been in season 7 or episode 7. But I thought there were, and I think that's interesting about I thought too, I loved that friendship conversation as Mike and Will are climbing the tower in the Upside Down. I thought that resonated with me. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can imagine high school guys being like, yeah, I don't know about all this other stuff. What I know is that like we're friends, and
Yeah,
that's sacrosanct. That's
exactly.
not touchable. I thought
Yep.
it was very. I thought there were really kind of 3 things I just want to enter in, or 4 things, and see what you make of them. I found the plot justification for this coming out scene very thin. I mean,
Mm,
I recognize the what they said about like, yeah, this was a fear that Vecna projected into my head, so I'm just going to go ahead and try and shred that fear. It just struck me as something like, okay, this is, I would turn this back around to a student and say, you need to come up with a better rationale for this character choice if this was a creative writing class. Like, that just seemed, there are so many other, and it struck me as disingenuous with other lines where there had clearly been a lot of thought about why characters are doing what they're doing. I just didn't think it was deep enough for that. I also thought they set up, there were several specific conversations between Will and Robin where Robin is coaching Will on how to
yeah.
come out. And I thought, okay, so that already had me looking for, okay, are you trying to play into like a conservative stereotype, which I don't think the Duffer Brothers are doing, but I mean, I presume I'm still very fervently evangelical in my Christian
Sure.
practice, and like it is a broadly conservative evangelical view that the majority of people who struggle with homosexuality or same-sex attraction do that coming out of some sort of abuse situation and are then coached into a culture and a series of life practices. Well, and that's exactly what they showed happening with Will. They don't.
Mm,
I thought they lost really any access to drop into debater speak for a moment. They lost access to any sort of this is just his nature kind of argument when they showed us Robin explaining how this is how you really have happiness. This is how you really have freedom. You have to tell everybody about this part of you. This is why you're really afraid. And he then just followed the script. But that was then exacerbated by when I was thinking about those 4 kids. I mean, you're taking of the 4, you're taking the one who has a broken home, who was kidnapped by a male figure, and was kind of trapped in the Upside Down, and has been literally possessed by Vecna every night. That's where we're shown in his dreams and so on. And also the when I'm thinking about it that way, the phallic nature of the umbilical cord that is coming from
Mhm.
Vecna into Will's mouth just screams problematic. Of like, this, so this is literally I read this as like, okay, this is a child abuse victim who is then deciding that this is part of who he is and telling everyone, and all of his friends are kind of okay with this. And as you would expect in this story, so all of that I just thought was like, it just did not resonate at all with the overall story. And it didn't resonate with this being a source of why he is now able to defeat Vecna.
Yeah, yeah, I don't disagree with you, Josh. And I would say this as well. Um, Again, I don't think they handled it well. It could have, and maybe with a better actor, it would have come across a little less forced than it did. Because Will, I mean, he's a fun character, but he's just too whiny. Yeah, and it's a problem for the story itself. And I really think that's because the actor's just not as good as the other actors. Whereas Robin, she can pull it off better because she's got that bravado, she's got that confidence to her, and it's like, oh yeah, you can almost understand her lesbianism because she's just quirky, and it's like, okay, and it fits with her quirkiness, But I think of this. I mean, if you go back and watch John Hughes films, and I love John Hughes, but if you go back and watch his films, probably several of his characters are gay, but he never made it explicit.
Mm.
And, I mean, from the opening scene that we meet Will, and Joyce is in the sheriff's office, and she says, "Well, they call him queer." And Hopper says, "Well, is he?" And she says, "What he is missing." Well, so we've already been told, really throughout the
Mm.
whole series, that Will is possibly gay. And we see that in season 4 when he's visibly upset at the way Mike is treating him. And so they didn't have to make it explicit. That was an artistic choice on a political choice on their part to do that. And I think it would have made the story in the same way that it's a more interesting story that we don't know if 11 is dead or not.
Mhm.
It would have been a more interesting story if we didn't know if Will was gay or not. If it had just been ambiguous. But again, really, and Josh, you just again, having lived through this, it was a big deal in the mid and late 80s to have a kind of coming out
Mm.
moment. And and I would take I loved what you said psychologically, but I would take that even further. If there was a kind of grooming of Vecna and Will, then it is incredibly important that he
Mm.
confesses that open. I mean,
Oh,
it's a part
sure.
of psychological health to be able to say that out loud too. And maybe that's what the Duffer Brothers were. I'm not trying to excuse them. I'm
Sure.
just trying to think why they may have done it the way that they did it. Yeah.
Well, I love that you brought out the fact that ambiguity can be a strength rather than a weakness of a show, because that's the other piece I wanted to ask you about. There are I've been so for the last really kind of 4 days, my Twitter feed has just been filled with people complaining about Stranger Things, and
Oh,
um, which
okay.
I've kept track of these, and I'm just going to read four some my
Sure.
summary of four different. I'm going to read their handles just on the off chance that any of these people want to repost this episode, but these are my summaries of kind of their complaints. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as somebody who's thought very carefully about this. And we've got a comment and a question coming in that we'll have to get to too before we are wrapping up for today. But at Matthew D. Marsden thinks Stranger Things has been declining since season 3 when it became fixated on the message. I'm taking as a broad summary of kind of wokeism. Hans Fine of Lutheran Satire, he thinks the Duffer Brothers don't actually know what their own show is about.
Hmm.
Somebody named at Appy Ortho says, you've already kind of addressed some of this, but he had a really interesting post about Stranger Things is the 80s with gay people, but no church. And church is what made the 80s possible. And then one I saw today from at Saddest Byler was a 3-minute TikTok video listing 43 plot hole questions that are left unanswered by the
Oh my.
finale.
Oh my.
And I watched the video. I was like, okay, I don't know how to answer any of these questions. So, with all of that as kind of just the setup, what do you make of kind of fan reactions where some folks are just super happy about the way this all ended? And then there's a large contingent, at least, of online folks who are like, the way this all wrapped up seems to have massive holes in it and massive problems. What do you make of that, Brad?
Well, yeah, there's so since season three, because of Robin's coming out, there's definitely a woke element to the story sexually. But remember, even in episode one, Nancy and Steve are in bed together. So, there is a sexual theme
Mm-hmm.
that's run throughout the whole show. Not my favorite part by any means. But again, not totally unrealistic to the 80s
Mm-hmm.
either. There was a lot in the 80s. I mean, there was a lot, especially among my friends. My friends weren't into drugs. We didn't cuss like the kids do in Stranger Things. That's actually, if there's anything that's completely inaccurate, that idea that everybody's throwing around, the S word and the F word, that just was not happening in the 80s at all. And I'm not sure why the Duffer Brothers think that it was. But that's just not happening. But there was, I mean, we in the forgive me, Josh. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the culture around me.
Sure.
This was always called fooling around. And we didn't have cell phones. We didn't, but yeah, on Friday nights, guys and girls would go park and they'd be in the back seats of their cars. And that sexual element was definitely a part of youth culture at the time. I'm sure it starts in the 60s, but it
Mm-hmm.
was definitely a part of it. So I don't blame the Duffers for having that sexual element. I just wouldn't have made it as prominent as they did, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. I wouldn't, I mean, think about Will. Yeah, I'm sorry, not Will. Think about Mike and Eleven. They're
Mm-hmm.
clearly very attracted to each other. And to the point where Hopper has to tell them, don't sit on that, I mean, keep the door open 3 inches. Right. So, I mean, and that's okay. I mean, I thought that was cute.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't over the top. It was like, no, no, that's the way, 15-year-olds would be at that time. So I thought that was okay. But again, once Robin comes out, so here's the problem. So you've got season three, four, and five, all of which have not heterosexuality, but homosexuality as dominant themes. And I think it's more or less, how much do you want to exaggerate those?
Mm-hmm.
So probably if you took up screen time of the final three seasons and that sexual element, it's probably not a lot of screen time. But because it's done poorly, it sticks out a lot. And plus we've had, I've seen interviews with the actor who plays Will, where he said, no, being gay is my superpower. Like, come on. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, nobody's sexuality, whether you're straight or gay, that's nobody's superpower. That's ridiculous. Sex is a biological urge we have to recreate the species every generation. It's not something that gives us a superpower. Whatever it is, it's just not. And so that I thought was unfortunate that you have that. But I guess for me, it doesn't destroy the show because there's still so much going on. So, Josh, I don't know how you would rank it. This is what I would say. I would say in order of greatness, season one, season two, season four, season five, season three. That would
Ooh.
be my order of ranking for where the seasons fit in. But again, I'm willing to overlook the awkward sexual elements.
I'd have to go back and do a dedicated rewatch in order to come up with a fair ranking like you just did. So I don't know, and I don't know that I love this show that much that I'm willing to do that. I have a few shows I've done that with, but I
Yeah.
enjoyed this one. I would probably take it a different way in terms of thinking about the show as a whole. in part based on where you started our conversation about an hour ago. If this is kind of showing a new mode of storytelling of like what's possible across with streaming rather than episodes that are broken up by literal advertisements or the confines of a 90 to 120-minute movie. um, I would take this kind of as I would try and view this thing as a whole. And I think the storyline is interesting. The plot developments are interesting. The commemoration of the 80s, I think, is significant. I've got a friend of mine, Andrew DiGiovanni, who he loves Stranger Things because of just the 80s callbacks. And he just
Mm,
loves all of that. Um, but I also think there are some significant flaws in here. So I think the flaws for me would probably drop this down to like the level of a good Netflix show. I don't know that I would put it at a great Netflix show. I don't know that we've really kind of figured out if a great Netflix show is possible. Several years ago, I wrote an essay for Public Discourse about the Netflix adaptation of The Queen's Gambit. I titled the I felt rather brazen titling it The Netflix Effect, but they let me title it The Netflix Effect. But I think there's a pretty consistent pattern of Netflix taking seriously, genuinely good stories and then adding a darker element to those good stories. And that darker element doesn't actually strengthen the story unless it's executed with really true excellence. Generally, the darker element just adds the kind of pieces you were talking about a moment ago with the sexual themes. Or like, this is just not executed particularly well, and it distracts from the main story. So I think for me, if I'm evaluating the story, I want to consider seasons 1 through 5 as a whole, since the Duffer Brothers, at least as of last week, were saying this is the end of the story. This week, they're saying there's a spinoff and an animated
mm.
thing coming. So, like all good content creators, there can always be more. But if you take seasons 1 through 5 as a whole, I think I would put this all at like good, but not great.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't. I sound like I do, but I don't watch a lot of
Yeah.
TV. But when I do, I take the shows I watch really, really seriously, and I immerse myself in them. So I mean, just recently I watched Pluribus. Have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
that? Okay, and I watched Severance,
Oh,
and
I gave
I
up on
don't think.
Severance, but I've made it. I'm up to date. I made it to the season finale of Pluribus.
Okay.
Oh.
I mean, I don't think either of those shows would have been possible without Stranger Things showing how to
Mm.
do it. So I think Stranger Things really is incredibly innovative in making this format work. And I would say this. So, if I think back on the shows I really love, so like X-Files for me, Star Trek is a
Mm.
big one for me. I would put Stranger Things at maybe not at the top, but very, very close.
Okay.
Uh, I a show that's on right now that I like even better is called Dark Winds. Have you seen that?
I've not. I
That
saw you. I saw
okay.
you posting about it, but I have not watched it.
Yeah, to me, that's a pretty perfect show. They've gone 3 seasons, and I haven't seen a single flaw in the show. Like every episode is just perfect. The music, the acting, the story, everything. But it's a realistic story. It's not, well, it's got magical elements to it, but it's a story that takes place in 1970 on the Navajo reservation,
Mm.
and so the main characters are all Navajo, and it's amazing. So Dark Winds I highly, highly recommend. But I just think, again, this is how I would put it, Josh. Stranger Things is a show with some unfortunate woke elements,
Mm.
but it's not a woke show. That is, I think that it's a traditional story that's pretty much apolitical or anti-political, but really does focus on excellence. It focuses on courage. I mean, all the virtues are in Stranger Things, in at various levels. And when they're not, that's when people fail. And I like the fact that we're seeing these people who are deeply flawed, but through friendship and courage can overcome those flaws. I mean, that stuff, we saw that in John Wayne Westerns. I mean, it's the best of Hollywood when they do things like that. So it's not brand new. It's just new in the way the Duffer Brothers put it together.
I think what you're making pretty clear, for starters, you've already answered the first question that's come in. Winston Elliott asked the question, "What's the best reason
Yeah.
to watch this show?" Which for starters, like it's great to know Winston's tuning in today.
Yeah.
But
So
the
hi, Winston.
the other thing I'll say is I think I've been convinced for years that even though stories are a form of fiction, the best kind of stories are the only kind of story that actually works has got to be a story that maintains truth. And so when stories deviate from truth, eventually they kind of fall apart. And Stranger Things, I think, works because they don't completely deviate from truth. And it's the kind of literary, it's the kind of truth that can only be conveyed through a story. It's really what they reach for. Um, well, I want to
Yeah.
turn it back over to you in just a second to see if you have anything else to say to Winston's question. But we have 50 folks tuning in on live stream today, which is pretty exciting. I usually don't get huge stats on my show, so that's a great audience. So if anybody currently tuning in has a comment or question you want to get in the show, go ahead and put that in on comments on the platform you're watching on. I'll try and get that in before we wrap up. But Brad, do you have anything that you'd want to add to the question? What is the best reason to watch this show? Just in case anybody watching is still skeptical after our conversation today.
Well, I would say this. It's one of those shows that you can fully immerse yourself in. It's not a show to watch superficially. There's just too much going on. There's too much depth. There are too many characters. It's too complicated a plot. But I think if you really, and this is, for me, I don't like sitcoms because I get bored really quickly. And, I mean, a good 3 minute Saturday Night Live skit I'm okay with, but 22 minutes of jokes just doesn't do it for me. I mean, I really like to be immersed. If I'm going to be in something that's artistic, I want to be a part of it. And I feel like from the opening scene of Stranger Things all the way back to season one, it is an invitation to this bizarre world and coming into it. And again, Josh, I'm a Dungeons and Dragons player. So, and the whole show, that's its plot structure. I don't know if you ever played,
Mm-mm.
but when you play, you always level up. And as you level up, the monsters you meet are bigger and the story arc becomes more complicated. That's the whole leveling up process. And so you think about in Stranger Things, we have the Demogorgon, and then we have the Mind Flayer, and then we have Vecna, and then we have Strahd, right? And so that you're just leveling up every time. So it's all
Mm.
based on D&D. And I mentioned earlier I had a terrible stepfather. I grew up in a very broken house
Mm.
and I still had a great childhood despite that. But I had a very broken house. But the D&D was a lifesaver for me. I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I would be here talking to you right now
Mm.
if I had not had that world to immerse myself in as a kid to escape the hell of my family. And so when I watch Stranger Things, I can relate to all of that. Everything that's going on in that story, I can say, okay, not only am I at the same age that these guys were, but I'm doing the same things. My life, the only thing that was different for me is I was a debater and debate became my world then
Mm.
in high school. And they don't show that in Stranger Things, right? You've got the nerds and you've got the jocks. But it was more complicated than that in the 80s. You have the drama kids, you had the debate kids, you had the music kids, all of those that they show Eddie as a music kid, but they didn't get into it enough, I think. Uh, but yeah, so that just to answer Winston, and of course Winston's my best friend. I mean, he knows what I like, and he and I have similar tastes in shows. But yeah, that's what I would say.
I finally got the chance to meet Winston at the Academy of Philosophy and Letters last
Yeah,
June. So it
that's
was
great.
wonderful to actually, I'd seen him on Facebook for years, but it was great to actually meet in
He's a
person.
pretty cool guy.
I concur.
Yeah.
Um, well, Brad, I think we've talked about everything that I had on my list, and this is I really enjoyed our conversation today. Talk to us a little bit
It's been
about
great.
your talk to us a little about your net. What's in your writing pipeline? I know you were putting up pictures of a new Inklings project, so tell us a bit about what you got
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah, before we do that, Josh, I was just looking at the comments. I want to
Oh
say
yeah,
hi to Augie as well. Did you guys overlap at Hillsdale?
we for 1 year we were
Okay,
in. I was I think yeah, I'm pretty sure Augie and I overlapped for 1 year. We were in a I as a freshman, I got kind of sucked into an older student friend group that he was pretty key to.
nice.
Uh, Tim Cook, and then Kat, who married him, became Kat Cook, and JT Tucker and Augie were in, and
Sure.
Brandon Hugo, and now Christy Hugo, and of course Brandon and Christy are back in Hillsdale now. So I knew Augie was the something of the hopefully this doesn't get him in any trouble, but he was something of the computer hacker of that group.
Yeah,
If
he's
we
great.
ever needed a way to get to a movie that no one wanted to pay for, Augie always had the route to that movie. So
I love
and
Augie.
he's
That's
since gone
great.
on to work for Google and does much better things now, I'm sure,
Yeah,
than he did then. But yeah, so yeah, he chimed in with one comment about seeming like Will was coached into his coming out scene rather than it being innate. And then a great comment about Stranger Things was the first show I could think of had more varied lengths to its episodes. They got more variance in season 3, but then they seem to have flexibility in the storyline. I noticed that in season 5 at least, and especially when you get to that finale episode, the final episode, it's 2 hours long as a single episode. They were
yeah.
definitely playing with the structure in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which again, I think is just brilliant. And I do think it goes back to Straczynski and Babylon 5
Mm.
and what he was able to accomplish. Great to see that kind of innovation in all of this. That's my cat. One of my many cats. Um, so yeah, thanks, Augie, for asking about my books. Um, I've got two books coming out this year. So in late April, early May, I've got a book coming out called The Declaration of Independence, 1776, and all that. And it is a comprehensive history of the move towards independence, starting in 1761 and then going up to July 4th of 1776. I'm really excited about that. I've got the cover for that as well. I don't think I can make it public yet, but I've got the cover. It looks really cool. And then in November, on November 16th, I've got a book coming out called Tolkien and the Inklings, Men of the West. And that's going to be a big book in terms of length. It'll be about 500 pages. So yeah, not quite as big as my Russell Kirk book, but good size. And I'm excited about that as well. I've got the cover on that. I think it looks gorgeous. They tried to make it look, if you could imagine what the Silmarillion would have looked like in the
Mm.
1950s, that's what they did for the cover. So it's a retro cover, and I think it's really cool looking, and I'm really excited about that. And I'm working with Encounter Press, and they've been fantastic. They've put so much money into the book.
Mm.
They've hired a full-time editor who's a best-selling author, and he and I have been going through and trying to make sure all the sentences are right, everything. So that's been really good, doing real detailed work on that. I'm right in the middle of that right now, doing that. And then I've got two more books coming out, but not for a bit with Notre Dame Press. I've got a biography of a guy that a lot of people have forgotten. His name's Robert Nisbet,
Oh.
and he was a really interesting countercultural conservative in the 1950s. He's profoundly a conservative, but he was deeply influenced by anarchism, and so it's a fascinating study to look at that, to see where he's going with that and how he was trying to do that. So that's a couple of years away. But then I have another book under contract that'll be out in 2028, and that's an analysis of Ray Bradbury
Mm.
called Prophet of the Space Age. So those are my projects right now.
Oh,
Yeah, crazy stuff. So, but I'm having a blast with all of them. And
I'll bet.
yeah, yeah. So
Well,
thanks for asking, Josh. And when do you guys have a release date for your book yet?
it's still a little bit under wraps. We've just because of some of the stuff I can't talk about on the show yet. We've had
Okay,
two. We've announced twice and then had to not release the book yet. So I'm hoping to be able to share that pretty publicly by the end of January. We should know for sure when
great,
the release date is, but tentatively hoping for this coming spring. But we'll have more details soon.
great,
Is
Josh.
your declaration book? Are you at all punning on 1066 and all that?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good,
yeah.
good, good,
That's
good.
yeah, yeah. Because I that's a great. I love
I mean,
that.
it's
And my book is more serious, right? That's
right.
obviously a satire, but yeah, no. Maybe the press will change the subtitle, but at this point, that's what it is. They've kept it so far, so we'll see. And it's coming out through actually an economics
Oh,
press. They invited me to write the book about 2 years ago, and so it's a kind of an unusual press to go with, but they've been great to work with, really great.
oh, that's awesome. On your Robert Nisbet book, I'm teaching Nisbet next this semester for the first
Oh,
time. We're
which book
reading
are you doing?
the
Quest
quest
for
for the
Community?
quest for community. Yeah. So I've had
Oh,
it on my shelf for
so good.
years and never read it. And I got handed a class. I don't know if you've ever had one of these classes. But it's one that someone else kind of dreamed up, and we have to have it, and it has to have the title that it has. But I looked at it and thought, I don't want to do that. I want to do something different than this. So
Yeah,
we're it's going to be virtuous leadership in a free society is the title of the class. And we're going to read a few of
excellent.
Plutarch's lives, and then we're going to read Quest for Community, and we're going to end with Wilhelm Röpke's book, A Humane Economy.
Humane
Uh,
economy,
yeah.
excellent. Oh, that's great.
No.
Well, Josh, I'm teaching Christian humanism this spring,
Oh,
and yeah, I will be teaching Nisbet and Repke as well, more focused on T.S. Eliot and Kirk. But yeah,
oh,
so stuff you would like,
oh! I
fun stuff.
just this end of the last semester we closed with the four quartets, and I have not been able to get. I feel like I finally understand. I read one of Russell Kirk's novels. Oh crud, I'm blank on the title.
Lord of
But
the
it's
Hollow Dark.
that's the one, Lord of the Hollow Dark.
Oh,
And
so good.
I read that without having really read enough T.S. Eliot to truly appreciate what Kirk is doing. And now that
Yep.
I've read the four quartets, I'm like, oh, now I get what this whole timeless moment thing is all about. But I
Yeah.
also don't really still understand the timeless moment. But it
Yeah.
makes more
That
sense to me than it used to.
that's my favorite Kirk book.
Mm.
I think that was his finest expression
Oh,
of anything he wrote. So amazing. But yeah, you're right. You've got to know a lot of Eliot for that
yeah.
book to make sense. Yeah,
Um,
definitely. And did you listen to Eliot reading his own poetry?
I listened to like the first few lines and then was like, okay, I can't. I had to weigh because of our new class format. We had 1 day and 2 hours to cover the whole of the four quartets. I was like, no, I don't think I can really justify too much time. So we focused more just on the poem rather than listening to Elliot read it. So I did not listen to the whole thing.
Well, Josh, if you want, we could share a Dropbox. I've got every poem he read. I've got all of those files,
Oh
and
my
he had a
goodness.
great voice, an amazing voice.
Hmm.
So just yeah, let me know if you want those, and I'll
Okay.
gladly share those with you.
For sure. Well, Brad, I'm going to read Winston's last question here as a close because I think it's really just perfect. Winston Elliott III asks, how does Brad have time to watch TV and write so many books? Can he bilocate? And I'm sure the answer is yes to that question. Thank you so much for coming
I,
on the Optimistic Curmudgeon today.
yeah,
This has been really great.
thank you, Josh. It's always great seeing you, my friend. Always great. So thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of The Optimistic Curmudgeon. If you enjoyed this episode, like it and share it with your network. Help others think great ideas. You can find the show on all the platforms, but primarily on X as at The Optimistic C3, on Facebook and LinkedIn under my name, Josh Herring, and on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to get the next conversation.